We need to keep activating our pieces. Rook e7 is correct. Whoa! Woo! Throw some... Turn the air conditioning on. Wow, 8,000 from my boy. This is exactly what we practiced for. Ooh, he just lost. Ooh, damn girl, Moist with 8,000. Welcome, guys. Charlie, thank you so much. We got another huge 1 a.m. raid from my boy, the Slayer of Dragons, the Conqueror of Worlds. Welcome, guys, and you come at a great time. I am doing my speed run. And we are playing Hey Harem. So let's play d4. We've been mostly playing e4. I want to also showcase Queen's Gambit. Here we go. This is the Queen's Gambit, and he responds with the Slav defense. I'll talk a little bit about the Queen's Gambit after the game. E6 is the Queen's Gambit decline. C6 is a version of declining the Queen's Gambit called the Slav. And in the Slav, we continue to offer up that c-pawn by developing our knight. So we develop both of our knights. This is the mainline theory of the Slav. And now e6 is called the semi-Slav. A very theoretical opening. Now, white is a major choice here between several different variations. I'm going to play what I actually normally play as my main line, and that is the fianchetto the bishop. This is the g3 variation of the Slav. You shouldn't put too much weight into this. This is a theoretical line where white fianchettos the bishop, which is a pretty reasonable thing to do here. Notice what I'm doing. He can take the pawn on c4 at any moment. And after the game, I'll show you guys how white responds to that. Okay, so how should we proceed with the development here? This is very similar to the Catalan. So at this point, I've had enough of offering that pawn to him. So how can we ensure, without releasing the tension, which would help him, that that c4 pawn is safely protected? So we don't have to worry about it anymore. Let's go b3, exactly. Now, in terms of this bishop, where should it go? Where do you guys think we should develop this bishop, depending on what he does? Yeah, okay. We have two possible options here. One is the sort of kinetic energy move. One is the potential energy move. Now, bishop g5 would be a little bit useless due to h6. Bishop f4 is the kinetic energy move. But let's play a potential energy move. Bishop b2. You guys look at this and say, well, what? Look at this girl! This bishop just biting on granite. What am I doing? But here's the thing. I'm now going to orchestrate a plan that involves trying to remove that pawn from d5 so that my bishop on b2 comes to life. How do we remove the pawn from d5? Well, we need to orchestrate e4. But we can't play e4 because it blunders the pawn. But hey, that's why we put the bishop on g2. Who can spot a way to prepare e4? Knight to d2 is correct. Rook e1 would be also fine. But this also opens up our other bishop, so it sort of does several things at once. And once we play e4, he's going to have a very hard time keeping the pawn on d5 because it's going to be attacked from so many different sources. He can, but it's going to be hard. We're actually threatening e5 ourselves. His knight is kind of trapped. And if he takes, then we have the later possibility of going d5 ourselves. And guess what? That bishop on b2, its potential energy is going to be transmuted into kinetic energy. That's why we put it there. And can we play d5 immediately? We can actually consider it. g6 is a very weakening move. I don't know why he did that. But let's first improve our position. Let's make a couple of general improving moves. Who can propose for me a sort of a standard connecting kind of move? Rook e1 is fine. I also like queen d2 in such positions in order to put the rook behind the queen, rook d1. That would help prepare the d5 pawn break, and we can put the other rook on e1. Let's do that, rook a d1. No need for anything crazy. Queen h6 would be interesting, but he could chase that queen away with bishop f8. I don't particularly like that. And at this point, we already very seriously need to consider d5, because this bishop's diagonal, in light of the fact that he's played g6, is tremendously strong. But the thing is, we want to be patient in these positions. What my coach always says, prepare slowly, attack fast. Right now, we're preparing slowly, so that when we do play d5, it comes with far greater effect than if we rush it. Was I rushing? Were you rushing, or were you dragging? Now we have improved all of our pieces. Our rooks, nicely placed. Queen, well placed. Bishops on the long diagonals. Knights connected with each other. Even without calculating a single variation, I can almost guarantee you guys that this move is going to work, because our pieces have Tremendous potential energy. His pieces are all clustered on the back couple of ranks. I've made this move on the basis of intuition alone. We have an ideal position, so let's sacrifice the pawn in order to rip apart this diagonal for our bishop. And because he's played g6, he's going to pay a very, very steep price for that. Not quite my tempo. But now comes the stage where we need to respond precisely. Let's not get too casual here. Let's not get too cavalier. What should we do in this position? How do I think about this? Well, first of all, it's important to notice that our bishop on b2 is not yet operating to its entirely full potential here, because there's a knight on c3 that's sort of blocking that bishop's access to his king. So that's like priority number one. Is there any way that we can, yeah, let's go knight to b5. Let's open up that bishop so that it does what it's supposed to do here. So let's see how he responds to it. Now he does have queen c2. That's kind of a nasty move. I saw this move, don't worry. And I have a response to that prepared. But, he can also play knight takes e4. And we'll deal with that if he does it. Also something I saw. Yeah, but you say I would never see that, but that's exactly... Okay, so queen c2 is less scary than it looks. Why? Because he's not actually threatening anything in regards to our queen. And if we look at our two knights, we can... Yep, knight ed6. That's simple. And again, transformation of the advantage. You guys might look at this and say, well, wait a second. You're trading queens. Isn't that good for him? Isn't it good for him to trade queens? Technically, yes. But our pieces are so strong that even without the queens, we still have a tremendous level of initiative. Our bishops are great. His pieces are all kind of loose. And I've mentioned many times that the higher rated you are, the more you have to be able to do that. Okay? Oh my god. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what should we do in this position? What should we do in this position? How do we continue our initiative? We need to keep activating our pieces. Rook e7 is correct. Whoa! Woo! Throw some... Turn the air conditioning on. Wow, 8,000 from my boy. This is exactly what we practiced for. Ooh, he just lost. Ooh, damn girl, moist with 8,000. Welcome, guys. Charlie, thank you so much. We got another huge 1 a.m. raid from my boy, the Slayer of Dragons, the Conqueror of Worlds. Welcome, guys, and you come at a great time. I am doing my speed run. Some of you probably know what that is. And after this game, we're in the middle of a game where I am about to finish crushing this guy. Okay, so as you can see, my pieces here are incredibly well placed, but we've got to be very careful. And we have to separate sort of the reality here. What is going on? Gem 10! We're popping off with 10 gifted subs. Oh, I can't keep up with this. Let's just take his pawn here. That would be the simplest thing to do. Rook takes f7, and we're simultaneously attacking his knight on f6. Now, there was a very tempting move here that I'll explain after the game, which would have been wrong. And I'll show you guys why it would have been wrong. 100 bits from I Am That Victoria. 11k viewers. This is amazing. This is just what I needed, and I really, really appreciate it. Love Charlie's community, and you guys are always welcome in my stream. I'm honored. I'm absolutely honored, so welcome, guys. Okay, so rook c6 is a great move. He's actually playing incredibly well. Private Butters, 5 gifted. Let me focus on not losing this game, though. Let's play bishop takes f6, smashing down that knight. And what's going to happen here, I actually didn't play this very well. But that's okay, Mahlan Miller with 5 gifted. Holy smokes. Holy smokes. Okay, so we are in a better endgame right now. Now, believe it or not, he's actually beaten back my initiative. So white is still better, and after the game, I'll explain why. I'm starting to play very quickly here because look at my time. I've got 36 seconds. And in chess, if you lose the game on time, you lose the game. That's tantamount to losing. So it's very, very important to play very fast here. And I'm starting to push my pawns up. Curious chimpanzee. But this is unbelievable hype. Now we're basically pushing our kingside pawns. My kingside pawn majority. Now we're getting the king up because it's an endgame. We need to activate our king. This pawn on d5, if you guys will notice, is very weak. This guy is really good. I have to say, he is playing like a GM in this game. Okay, but we're going to smash our pawn to g6. That pawn is a protected passer. I'll explain everything I'm doing. I know people's head is probably spinning at this point. And we are going to give a check, and we are going to give checkmate. Mr. Bowser, thank you for the prime. Wow. Okay. I'm not getting my tea yet. Okay. Most of you have seen that show. This is the Queen's Gambit. This is the opening called the Queen's Gambit. Okay? Why is it a gambit? What is a gambit? A gambit is when you give up a pawn. And you give up a pawn in order to achieve something. In this case, why does white give up this pawn? Who can explain that to me? Yep, and I also have been active on YouTube, something that Charlie, has also helped me tremendously with, to which I owe him a great debt of gratitude. Yeah, white controls the center. So white gives up a pawn to control the center. That's the typical reason for a gambit. That's not the only reason for a gambit. If you think about the king's gambit, which is the same thing on the other side of the board, basically you do the same thing. You give up a pawn to control the center. Controlling the center, one of the most basic things that you want to do in chess. Is it a bad thing to capture this pawn? No, this is called the Queen's Gambit accepted. That's a legitimate variation. But my opponent declined the gambit and played c6. This is called the Slav. This is called the Slav. We are almost at 100k subs. I cannot believe all the support that's been coming my way recently. It's been absolutely incredible. Black has several ways of... Black has several ways of declining the gambit. He can play e6. That's called the Queen's Gambit declined. And c6 is called the Slav. Okay. I also do coaching, but not taking students right now. I'm got a very, very full schedule. But yeah, that's sort of the main thing I do. Now, basically, we're both developing our pieces right now. Black plays the move e6, reinforcing his control over the pawn on d5, and opening up the bishop on f8. Now that bishop can get developed. Those of you, who are not too experienced, you've probably heard this, but when you first start a chess game, what both sides want to try to do is develop their pieces, right? You need to develop your pieces and put them on good squares, because the ultimate objective of a chess game is to deliver checkmate to the king. To put your opponent's king in a position where it is in check, it is attacked, and it has no escape squares. But in order to do that, if you compare chess to a war, you need to deploy your army. You're not going to win a war if your soldiers sit around Starbucks drinking pumpkin spice lattes and, and shooting the breeze. You need to deploy them to good squares, and that's basically what you do in the first. I love pumpkin spice lattes. That's my favorite drink in Starbucks, but hey, can't always do that. There's a time and a place for that. And during a chess game is not the place for that. But basically, we're both trying to get our pieces to active squares. G3 is called fianchettoing the bishop. We bring it to the big diagonal. So we're both developing castle, castle. And now we have to decide where to put this bishop on c1. It's still on its initial square. We need to develop this bishop. And as I talked about before, after b3, which defends the pawn, we have two main choices about where to put the bishop. We can put it on f4, which is a nice square for the bishop, but we put it on b2. Remember potential and kinetic energy. Questions now. We're going over the game, so questions now, but wait until I reach the point at which you want to ask the question. So, try to ask questions on the current moment that we're at. Why'd you defend c4 so late? That's a great question. Let me mute the sub sound for now, as the alerts catch up to us. Now, basically, black could take the pawn at any moment. Okay, black can capture the pawn. Am I blundering this pawn? No. This is basically an extension of the Queen's Gambit. And what white usually does here is either e4 to control the center. That's actually the main move here. e4 controls the center. And in terms of trying to win the pawn back, what black can do in such a position is go b5. The idea being to support the pawn with its neighbor. How can white go about stopping b5 from happening? Yeah, I'll talk about that in a moment. White can play the move a4. That's a very typical move. I've had this position before in my tournament games. Then you can go after the c4 pawn with something like queen e2 captures c4, or even knight d2 takes c4. So either of those moves is fine. This is the theoretical continuation. If black plays b5 here, I want to introduce to you guys a very important principle. And the principle is that when your opponent spends a long time playing on the flank, playing on the side of the board, you often want to strike in the center. Because when he's expending his attention doing random stuff on the side of the board, usually he weakens his center, and that's exactly where you want to strike. So e5 would not be the best move here because it would help him get this nice little outpost for his knight. But the move would be d5. And now he cannot avoid the center getting open. Look at how we're striking through everything. He has to open up the center. This bishop gets super strong. Black's position kind of starts collapsing here. And this is just not good for black. Also, this pawn hangs. So that's a principle to be aware of. It's not a law, but it's a good guideline for when your opponent is playing on the side of the board. Well, moving the bishop to g2 brings it onto the longest diagonal in the chessboard. That's kind of completing the fianchetto. There's more to get into here, but since the game was long, I want to keep things moving. Thank you, Fen Beingold, for the 200 bits. Now, what if b4 after d5? Great question. Well, b4 after d5, let's see. So here, it's important to avoid that knee-jerk reaction, right? He's attacking our knight, but rather than moving it, we can capture on e6 and counterattack his knight. And then if he takes back, what we can do here is we can even consider sacrificing the knight. We can simply leave that knight on c3 and make a move such as knight d4. Now, what the hell am I doing? Have you gone crazy, Daniel? Are you just giving up your knight? No. Where is this knight heading? Where is this knight heading? What am I doing here? Well, I have gone crazy. That happened when I was born. But, yeah, we want knight takes c6 here. And we attack the queen, we attack the pawn, and we get a massive attack in response to as compensation for the piece, right? That's what compensation is, when you sacrifice a piece and you have some sort of advantage in return for the piece, such as an attack. And I have a very aggressive style, so I like doing that. I think that's a very good idea in Blitz. Right, so knight takes e6 would be very, very strong. There's a lot more to get into here. Sorry, I keep doing that. I pressed the wrong button. There's a lot more to get into that. But that basically is the lay of the land if black takes on c4. So let's proceed with the actual game. Bishop b2, fianchettoing the other bishop. And just to reiterate, why am I putting the bishop on a square where it literally just stares at the pawn? Because, wow, 5480. I can't believe that self-count, ladies and gentlemen. Because the point is, what we're going to do in the future is we're going to prepare the move e4. And the idea of preparing e4 is to remove his pawn from d5. And in turn, eventually, we're going to push our own pawn to d5 and open up this bishop, where it's going to be incredibly strong. That's actually exactly what happened. That's literally exactly what happened. So watch. Knight d2 in order to prepare e4. Now we go e4. We force his pawn out of d5. And now we prepare the breakthrough d5. And we do that by improving all of our pieces. We patiently do that. We don't just go d5 immediately. We prepare slowly and attack fast. Our rooks go to the best squares. And here comes the, boom goes the dynamite, d5, right? We're ready to play d5 because all of my pieces have occupied ideal squares. And I have to give tremendous credit to my opponent. Throughout the speedrun, my opponents have been playing very well, which is awesome. And in this position, my opponent started to defend very, very well. I was quite impressed. So what happened? This is a pawn sacrifice. This is a pawn sacrifice because I can't take the pawn with my knight. He'll just take it with his knight. Thank you, Fen Beingold, for 300 bits. Yeah, rook ac1 might have been more accurate. I kind of played rook ad1 on autopilot, but I didn't know that he would play queen c7. I think he played it because he saw that I played rook ad1. And we can't take on d5 because of bishop takes d5. Small piece of advice. When you're trying to figure out whether you can play a move, don't only count the defenders and attackers. It also depends on what specifically is attacking a pawn. Here, there are actually more attackers on the pawn than there are defenders, but we can't capture with the queen because we give up the queen, right? So you can take on d5 and say, oh, great, well, I accomplished d5. Well, congratulations, I can give you a medal for that, but hey, you gave up a queen. So be careful about that. Okay, but that's okay. Now we play knight b5. What is the idea of this move? The idea is to attack his queen and open up the diagonal for our bishop. Now our mission has been accomplished, and our bishop on b2 is an absolute monster. So could somebody help me understand what would happen if he took on e4 with his knight, counter-attacking our queen? As you guys think about that, I am going to run and pour tea. I will be back in 10 seconds. My voice is starting to go. I need that tea Russian style. Give me 2 seconds. Now, the move here, the simplest move, is rook takes c4. Thank you for waiting. I can't believe Charlie rated me. That man is an absolute legend. I'm super pumped right now. So rook takes c4 is the move. What are we doing? Well, remember, we're still attacking his queen. And now we're attacking his bishop. Queen h6 looks very good because we're threatening checkmate. What's the problem with this move? The problem is that he plays bishop f8. and he counterattacks our queen and defends against the checkmate. This is complicated, but I hope that everybody can understand what's happening here. Basically, both queens are hanging. We have both queens, you know, at gunpoint here. Knight takes c7 and knight takes d2. Queen d4, bishop f6 is the same problem. He again attacks our queen and defends checkmate. Thank you, Malin Miller, for the gift to Mark Rohr. And the idea of rook takes c4 is that we eliminate his knight and we attack his bishop. He has to move his queen while defending his bishop. And he can do that by playing queen c5. And the position remains very complicated, but what we can actually do here is go b4. We're attacking his queen and trying to disattach his queen from the bishop. And once he takes my knight and I take his bishop, this is a very, very good position for white, because we are now finally ready to put our queen on d4 and threaten checkmate. Wolf, Razors, thank you for the prime. So this is super complicated, but basically white is in charge here. I don't want to bog ourselves down with the details, but clearly black is on his last legs. So he goes queen c2, we go knight e to d6, forking his rook and his bishop. He trades queens, which is good for him, but our position remains dominant. And after rook c7, we go rook to e7, involving our rook, putting it on the 7th ring, thank you, Malin Miller, attacking the pawn, and potentially threatening to capture his knight. Okay, and again, because we're at a relatively high rating, I know that a lot of people have questions about specific moves, and I know that I'm not answering all of them, guys, but please do understand that since I'm trying to keep this instructive as much as possible, I have to find a compromise between talking about the details but not boring people to death and discussing them for an hour, because I could talk about this game for an hour, but I want to keep things going smoothly. So I'll try to give the gist of the complications without talking about it too much. Hopefully I'm finding the balance reasonably well. And after he moves his bishop away, I actually committed a mistake. I thought from a distance that I would be able to play bishop takes f6. I thought that this would be winning. Why? Notice that this is a pin. If he takes our bishop, he loses his rook. But what did I miss here? And I didn't play this move. I simply thought that I would play it. But what does black have? I appreciate it, guys. Thank you. Rook c1 check. So he gives us the check. We have to deal with the check. Thank you, Rando Bando Dando. And now he's able to take our bishop because his rook is no longer hanging. Moreover, he's attacking our knight. This is not impressive for white at all. So instead of this, I doubled back and I said, okay, instead I'm just going to take his pawn on f7. But now he found a super good move. I thought that his position collapses. We're attacking his knight legitimately now because we're now attacking it with two pieces. But he plays this incredibly annoying move, rook c6. And here's why I defined type 1 and type 2 undefended pieces. Just as a reminder, one very important thing to notice in any chess position. Type 1 and type 2 undefended pieces. A type 1 undefended piece is a piece that is literally not defended by any other pieces. So in black's position, there is only one type 1 undefended piece. Which piece is that? Which piece is the type 1 undefended piece? The only one. It's the rook on c7. Why is that important? Well, because it's pinned. That tells us a lot about the position. But something that a lot of, I think, chess authors don't do is define type 2 undefended pieces, which is a piece that is defended by only one other piece. A piece that is defended by only one other piece. And pawns don't count. If a pawn defends a piece, it is defended. So the knight on d6, right, is type 1 undefended, and the rook is type 2 undefended. So this mechanism right here is incredibly flimsy. That's like, you know, Jimmy Garoppolo throwing a pass. Like, this is not going to end well. And what he does here is he attacks the knight. The knight is undefended, and the knight itself defends the rook. You guys can see how flimsy that is, right? That's not going to end well. So if I move the knight, I lose the rook. If I move the rook, I lose the knight. And so what I basically have to do is bail out. I have to take his knight with my bishop. He takes back. Well, I'm a big 49ers fan. Big 49ers fan. And I'm still upset that they lost the Super Bowl last year, so please forgive me. He is injured, but I still have to give him crap every time I have a chance to. So I'm from the Bay Area originally, and you know, I'm a pretty demanding fan. Now, what's going on in this position? And big Warriors fan as well. No, I love Jimmy G, of course. No. I think he's great. I think he's a super good guy. I believe in him. He's going to come back, but I'm still sour. Please understand that, you know. Now, white is still better here. Who can explain to me? Who can explain to me? Back to the game, guys. Who can explain to me why white is still better in this position, even though it seems like the worst is behind black? Definitely solving Mal on Miller, but I'll get into that after the game. Thank you, Ben Mine B, for the sub. Number 1, they have a weakness on d5. What's number 2? The number 2 thing is that he has an isolated pawn on d5. And what is the thing I always tell you guys to look for when your opponent has an isolated pawn? What is the key question that you have to ask to determine who's in charge? When you have an isolated pawn, that is a pawn which has no neighbors, do we control the square in front of the pawn? Who controls the square in front of the pawn? The answer here is white. Why does white control the square? Why can't black push his pawn to d4? Well, the reason why is that white takes the bishop. He has to take that, and he loses the pawn. He can't push it. Okay, so we simply blockade the pawn with our rook, and he basically has to occupy all of his pieces with the task of defending this pawn, which then gives me the opportunity to play on the other side of the board, and he doesn't have the resources necessary to, to adequately prevent me from expanding on the king side, because all of his pieces have to supervise this really, really weak pawn. He can't afford to lose it. And in the endgame, the value of one pawn increases tremendously. So this would be a disastrous pawn to lose. So what do I do here? We were playing really fast at this point, but what I'm trying to do is simply expand on the king side. I've got a pawn majority on the king side. And what do you use a pawn majority to do in the endgame? What is the ultimate goal of a pawn majority? How do you convert it? What do you convert it to? Eventually, you convert it to a passed pawn, right? You make a passed pawn, which is a pawn that can basically go all the way to promotion without pawn obstruction. Passed pawns will not necessarily promote. You can stop them with pieces, but you can't stop them with pawns. That's the definition. King f2 to stop his rook from getting anywhere. By the way, if he had gone king f5, that's checkmate, ladies and gentlemen. So you can still get checkmated in the endgame. Eventually, I trade pawns. I bring my king up. That's important. Notice what I'm doing here. Every time he's trying to get active with his pieces, I'm getting my bishop back to f3 and attacking his pawn. So I'm forcing his pieces back to where they were. Keep pushing. And now we get the passed pawn. And that passed pawn is protected. Okay, that's the best kind of passed pawn, because it can never be attacked. He's got no pawns that can undermine that pawn. This is called a protected passed pawn. That is the ideal situation. And then again, now he's in trouble. Now he got his rook to a vulnerable spot. So I get my rooks as active as possible. And now I go for checkmate. Check and checkmate. Okay? Guess what is responsible for this checkmate? That's the protected passer. Because he cannot take on g6. It's protected. So that is basically what won me the game. Now, there's a lot more to talk about here. But this game was long and it was detailed. So I don't want to bog ourselves down too much. I'll take a couple of questions and then we'll move on. Endgame does not just mean no queens. There is something called a queenless middle game. So if you think about it, this, for example, is not an endgame because all of the other pieces are on the board. There's no formal definition of an endgame other than the last stage of the game. But you use your common sense. It's like if you trade queens and you trade, I would say, 2 pairs of rooks, that's already an endgame. That's somewhere in that general area. He probably could have drawn the game if he defended better. But it was very difficult to do that in time pressure. If he goes rook takes g4 in the end of the game, was that a draw? So that's what he should have done. He should have taken with a rook. And we cannot give a check because we are in check ourselves. I think that white is probably better here because if you compare the passed pawns, I've got the protected passer and he's got the unprotected passer. I can get my rook behind to d2 and then get my king over and try to win his pawn. But black has an idea here that can probably draw him the game, which is to tie his rook to the h5 pawn. Probably he could have made a draw, but, you know, in time pressure, it's a very difficult thing to think of. He shouldn't have taken with the knight, right? If he ignores that and takes the knight, isn't it better? Yeah, probably. I'm just looking for questions. Yeah, so white is better, but with accurate defense, he could have made a draw. Thank you, Phineas. I appreciate it. How could you have exploited his position if he didn't move his pieces back to protect the pawn? Well, then I would have taken that pawn, right? I have a general positional question, asks Ryan Ellis Boyd. When you move out of the knight, would you move the pawn out to stop the bishop pinning it. I'm not exactly sure what you're asking, Ryan. Do you mean a situation like this where if you have this kind of situation, would you go e3 and allow the pin? So would you go h3 in this position to prevent the pin? Is that sort of the question? Just to clarify, is that the kind of question you're asking? Yes. So you need to use your judgment. Now, I've given you guys a couple of tips for evaluating whether a pin is dangerous. One of the top pieces of advice for evaluating whether a pin is dangerous is there a pawn that protects the pinned piece? So let's compare two situations. Let's compare this pin to this pin, right? If you compare these two positions, here there is a pawn defending the knight. Here there is no pawn defending the knight. It's a lot more dangerous when there is no pawn defending the pinned piece, because now your queen is stuck to the knight. Now, the moment black applies pressure on the knight, it's going to be a lot harder to defend it. So that's going to be one shortcut that you can use. And so when there is a pawn protecting the pinned piece, you shouldn't be too scared of it, particularly since you can end the pin with bishop e2. You've seen me do that many times. If you have a move like this in your pocket, you shouldn't be too afraid of the pin. There's a lot more to it, but that's a couple of small shortcuts that you can use to evaluate. Okay, does that make sense?